Hello, everybody. We're super excited to be here and share our years of experience in product management and companies. So by way of introduction, just real quick, my name is Donna Novitsky. I'm currently the CEO of a startup company called Yiftee, Y-I-F-T-E-E. However, I started my career as a product manager at Sun Microsystems, which I think is the best job in the world. So congratulations on making good choices. Went from there to running a startup company that went public, that was living the Silicon Valley dream, then became a venture capitalist with a firm called Moore David Al Ventures on Sand Hill Road. And after that, went back to my startup roots. So basically, everything I learned about startups and bringing new products to market, I learned in my first 6 years as a product manager, and that's what I'm here to share today. Laura?
Hey, great to be here. I'm Laura Marino. I am currently the Chief Product Officer at TrueML. That's a fintech company. But I've spent over 20 years leading product teams in large and small organizations. I have been across industries, primarily in B2B, but again, from large companies like SAP and Microsoft to smaller companies. And I would say that the area where I am most passionate about is what I call scale up. These are companies that are going through the high growth stage. So a board member of a nonprofit promoting women in diversity, and I've been instructor at Stanford for many years now.
Great. So what we're going to talk about is the transitions from starting with very early on, breathing life into your very first products. If any of you are out there in startups or thinking about startups, this will be super useful. And then moving from there to how to accelerate time to volume by avoiding all those things that you learn working for big companies that really don't apply to young companies. Not just startups, but bringing any kind of new products to market. And then Laura's going to talk about the 5 transitions that startups have to go through in order to scale, and those product challenges, and then some broader strategies for growth and expansion. So there should be something for everyone here. And without further ado, here we go. So number 1, mistakes to avoid while breathing life into your first products. So I call this the tango. It takes 2 to tango. What's going on here is she's saying, follow my lead, I'm building the product. And he's saying, follow my lead, I'm finding the customers and market. And the reality is you have to be doing both. My experience in venture capital, I saw so many entrepreneurs that were thinking all they had to do was build the product, and they were 100% focused on building that product. Well, the field of dreams strategy, if we build it, they will come, does not work. So we're going to talk about how do you build the market at the same time as you're building your first products. But it's really hard. You do not, what you have is your rockstar team, your exciting product plans, your vision, but you don't have a product, you don't have customers, you don't have a reputation. Nobody knows who you are. So how do you get those very first customers? How do you get it off your startup, your young company off the ground? You have to use what you have to get what you don't have. So, but first, there's a mindset that you need to have in order to be successful, not only at this stage, but at every stage. So my question for you is, what do customers care about? So they care about prices, they care about functionality, they care about quality. These are the answers I usually get, but really it's bigger than that. Customers care about themselves. So what you need to do is put yourself in your customer's shoes at all times, whether you're tiny, whether you're a large company. You need to demonstrate that you comprehend the customer's problem, you are competent to solve or realize that opportunity, and that you care. Because in the end, if you're a startup, nobody knows anything about your product. There is no product, there is no market, there is no reputation. So you have to convince them that you understand where they're coming from. So how do we do that? We're going to talk about that. But I'm going to use this diagram to illustrate some of the points that we'll be making. So I'm sure many of you come from the product development side of the house, and you're pretty familiar with the typical product development process, although this is vastly simplified, I know. So your ideas start out on a whiteboard, you build something, you debug it, you get it ready for production, product goes live, and eventually you roll it out, right? Okay, no big news there. But what you need to be doing on the marketing side is having these exploratory meetings. So when you're conceptualizing your product, ideating your product, you need to be talking to customers and finding out what are their issues, what are their opportunities, and how does your idea, your concept stack up against what's going on in their real world. The next stage is going through debugging and beta. So everybody understands when I send my product out for beta testing, I need to get feedback on the product. That's not enough. You need to also be building credibility with those customers, because if they don't trust you, if you are not credible, they're not going to buy your product. And then you go to having paying customers. You're not going to get those paying customers for your first products if you haven't built that credibility and that belief that you understand their issues. From there, you need to make sure that those initial paying customers are referenceable, because that's how you're going to grow. You're going to build on those initial customers to get more like them. And then you have a market. So we're going to use, this is all pretty obvious, right? I'm sure if I asked you guys these questions, you would say, yeah, this is of course what we're going to do. So like, what is she telling me? What's new here? So rather than talk about that anymore, I'm going to talk about all the mistakes that people made. And we're going to focus on these first two. There's lots of others. We could spend an entire class, an entire course covering the mistakes that product managers make in bringing products to market. But we're not going to do that. We're just going to talk about these first two. You need to make sure that you're building your market early on, and you need to also think about how you do that and what is your early customer testing process. So where people go wrong, where entrepreneurs go wrong, where product managers go wrong is they go, great, I had this idea, the VCs love me, my executive management love me, they gave us funding to build this product, I'm going to go off and I'm going to build that product, I'm going to build that vision, we're going to make it real. What's wrong with this? If you have that kind of mindset and you're not thinking about the market, you're going to either build too much, you're going to build the wrong stuff, or you're going to deliver too late. So this is where this concept of a minimum viable product comes in, which I'm sure you're all familiar with because everyone has read about MVPs and thinks about MVPs now. But that, again, that's not sufficient. What you have to also be doing early on is figuring out, how do our customers make purchase decisions? Where does my product fit in their hierarchy of needs? And who are going to be my early partners to build my to get paying customers, to get references, and to build my market? Am I going to end up in the right market if I have these customers? So those are the things you need to get right. Building the product vision is the danger zone. So again, if you do this wrong, if you just go out and build the product without a lot of customer input, your engineering department says, okay, great, here's the product, go get me some customers. This was fairly common in the early days at Sun Microsystems when I worked there. And Sun can get away with it, or could get away with it at the time, because they already had customers, they had a reputation, they had a market. People would buy the new product. If you're a young company, a startup, this is what happens. You go back to those exploratory meetings, you go back to getting that customer feedback, incorporating it in your product, and it can cost you 6 to 18 more months of development time. And that could be a round of funding. So it could mean, well, the bigger companies can get away with it, brand new startups cannot. You may not have that funding to redo that product. So what do you do to address this problem? How do you get these early on meetings with customers or potential customers? I would say if you're doing a B2B product, you need to meet with at least 30 prospective customers over a period of 3 months, while in parallel with the product being developed. And if you're doing a consumer product, it's more than that. So you're thinking about during this process, not just what are the features and functions that it needs to be, but what's going on with my potential customers? Where does my product rank in their priorities? What are the greatest pains that they have, or how does this opportunity fit for this business if it's a B2B company? Who makes budgeting decisions? We had one of the startups that I worked in when I was a VC had a great product for email administrators. And so we tested it and built relationships with lots of email administrators. They loved it. And so we brought this product to market, and the email administrators couldn't get the budget to buy the product. That is because when you talk to the CFO, email administration was not on the high priority list of things to fund in the company. So if you're not asking for money for your early testers, you're not going to have all the information that you need to be successful. Does that make sense? So the whole decision-making and prioritization process of what's going on with your customers is important, not just the features and functions of your product. So how do you do that? Because you don't even have a product to show them yet. How do you get these meetings? What is it that you do in order to learn what you need to learn about the market? So remember I said you need to use what you have to get what you don't have. What you have is a rock star team. Someone on your team is what I call the player. It's this guy. It's the person that can make that unbelievable shot. So probably a number of you are players and could play this role in your company, but it's basically someone that can be marketed in lieu of a product. For example, I worked in a supply chain company when I was a VC. That company, the CEO of that company had many years of experience with Deloitte and was billed out at $600 an hour, was a true supply chain expert. So people really wanted to talk to him. Customers, potential customers really wanted to talk to him, tell him their problems, get his advice on how to fix them. And so we went out, we met with our 30 customers over 3 months. We got a lot of great feedback. You have to watch out with players. Sometimes they like to talk, and your goal here is to listen. So these are the characteristics of a player. But the big thing is you are listening, you are not talking. You are gathering information, you are not selling. You're building relationships and credibility. That's what's important, because the player's expertise has more value to your first customers and less risk than your product. So this player has basically got to convince the customers that he or she comprehends the problem, is competent to address it, and cares about these customers. And they are betting on that person, not the product, when they make those purchase decisions. Think about that. So number 2, how to accelerate time to volume by avoiding the big company beta test process. I'm sure that a number of you, like I brought 17 new products to market at Sun over a period of 3 years. So I was constantly going through beta testing process. I was constantly doing product launches. I was constantly cranking out new products. And we had a process. And the process looks something like this. We identified who will test this product, who will do us this, quote, favor of testing the product. They would go out, they would identify features, quality issues, we would get that feedback, we would refer it, prioritize it, we would refer it to engineering, engineering would make the changes, and then in parallel, the company was learning how to deliver, how to support the product, just everything that you needed to bring a successful product to market. But at that time, we weren't really thinking about, is this customer, this tester going to buy the product or not? They may buy it, they may not buy it. They gave us the feedback, that's what we wanted. So then we finalized the product and we launched the product. So if you're doing things this way, I want to tell you, forget everything about how you do this. It is wrong for startups. Why is that? Because this is another mistake where entrepreneurs go wrong. When they bring new companies to market, they've been very successful at other companies and, previous to their startup. They're on big company autopilot. They know how to launch products. Maybe they launched 17 products like I did. They know the process. What's wrong with this process is that they are doing insufficient strategic customer and market qualification up front. And they're not focused on those early beta testers becoming referenceable. What you have to get right is you have to be very strategic about choosing who are going to be my early testers, because 80% of them have to actually pay money for this product. Remember all those things we need to learn from the player. You need to understand how purchasing decisions are made, where the money comes from. So if you don't ask for money, you're not going to learn all that. And it's crucial. So why is this important? Why is it different in a startup? Because the big company already has products, they have a market, they have reputation, they have existing customers. Startups, again, I'm talking about breathing life into first products. They do not. They don't have any of that stuff. It completely changes the game. So your early product testing process is the first time that your vision is being tested before the true judge, the customers. The customers have to love your product. They have to buy your product. It has to lead to additional sales, and it has to have those additional sales in the right markets, so that word of mouth leads you to a large market opportunity. Or else you go back to ground zero in market development, or your market is too small. So here's my Tango slide. And for an example, you go through your whole process and you end up with a market that's just not interesting. So I've personally fallen for this trap. It's easy to fall into. So what you have to do is make sure you're not choosing wrong customers. A lot of people think, is there a wrong customer? What would a wrong customer be? A wrong customer is a customer in the wrong market. Their priorities are not mainstream, and the customer has no intention of buying. So bottom line is, a wrong customer is a customer who is not referenceable. Your early product testing establishes those relationships. It's the groundwork for building the rest of your product line or in company. And if you don't make good choices, if you're not thinking strategically, you will end up starting all over again. So the early product testing, the obvious, you must get feedback on the product. Everyone knows that. But you also must select strategic customers and establish them as die-hard loyal customers so that you can build on top of that start. And with that, I will turn it over to Laura.
Perfect. So we're going to talk about the 5 transitions that startups must embrace to scale. But let's start by asking, why are transitions needed in the first place? And when you think of companies typically go through 3 stages. An early stage, like this early startup stage, scale up or high growth stage that I like to call the teenage stage, and we'll talk about why, and then an adult stage. So during the early stage, the company is still searching for product market fit, trying different things to see what actually resonates with the market. Is looking for a repeatable business model. And the team is a team that essentially is doing whatever it takes to get the product to market, to secure those very valuable early adopters that are going to help be a reference. In the adult stage, are grown-up startups. They might have gone through a liquidity event. They might have gone through IPO or be part of an M&A. And these are companies that are growing now through a more repeatable process. They are more sort of permanent organizations that are executing against a proven business model. And then you have this in-between stage, this stage where the company is no longer looking for product market fit. What they are trying to do is scale to grow the number of customers or consumers at a rate and in a way that will eventually allow them to be cash flow positive and really take over this market where they found that product market fit. And it is a completely different ballgame than that early stage, that we were talking about. And in reality, about 60% of companies that successfully exit this early stage with a good product, with product market fit, end up failing in this teenage stage. And I call it the teenage stage because when you think for a second about what teenage years are like, there's a lot of opportunity, but there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of awkwardness. There is a lot of anxiety. And I think that it maps very well to what companies in this stage are going through. And to understand why this stage is so difficult, we need to go back to look at why. Well, it turns out that the early stage strategies that help those startups get to this product market fit do not scale. And if we go back and look at what those strategies are, is we know companies need to move fast, test and iterate. They may even have to pivot because they are still not sure what is the right product for the market that they are targeting. They have a team that can wear many hats. Everybody is doing whatever it takes to get that product out to market and to make sure that they can get those first paying customers. Communication in the company is very informal, and that allows for a lot of agility. But because it's a small team, people are all aligned. They know what they're going after. And you will have those people who are the experts, whether it's the founder, the first engineer, they are the ones who know everything about the product and about the business. But because the team is small, this tribal knowledge is easily distributed. However, as you start the high growth and you're bringing thousands of new customers and hundreds of new employees, this approach becomes totally chaotic and it doesn't scale. So what are the changes? What are those transitions that those startups need to embrace when they get to this scale-up stage? And there are 5 key transitions, and I'm going to focus primarily on the third one, that's moving from early product to scalable product, because here's where we're going to be talking about what are the biggest challenges from the product perspective during high growth. And I'm going to talk about the last 2 ones, moving from ownership to partnership and moving from being opportunistic to being strategic, because this is where we're going to talk a bit about what are the strategies, the product strategies for scaling and expanding. However, because product touches everything in a company, I'm also going to talk about the first 2 transitions, because we as product people need to be involved in all of them. So the first transition is moving from people to process. And if you're part of a startup, you probably know that process is essentially a bad word. You say process in a startup and you're like, oh no, we're going to become all bureaucratic. But again, the reality is that in the early stage, you're going to have those people who are the players, who are the ones who know everything about the business and about the product itself and about the customer. You may have the situation where everything needs to go through a couple of those people. Well, when the company starts scaling, those people and that tribal knowledge that they have becomes an obstacle to grow. So what do you need to do? The first thing you need to do is embed that expertise, that knowledge of those unique people into the processes and the structure of the company. And that means starting to do better documentation. And that's across the board, from the HR processes to documenting the code, so that as you bring on new engineers, they kind of know what they are touching. You need to start creating more training programs and new onboarding. You are going to be hiring a lot of employees. You need to have a process to get them up to speed fast and to get them a consistent story of what the company is, what the product is. And you will start seeing role specialization, roles that did not exist in a startup that become more important when you start scaling up. And that could be sales operations. It could be legal. But the company needs to start really looking at what are the things that these people wearing 10 hats were doing that now need to kind of get their specialized team. You also need to create more formal communication cadence. Again, remember the communication can be very informal when you're a small company. But to keep people aligned as the company grows, you need to proactively communicate. And that's communicating about the business goals, about the progress, but also from the product perspective is communicating about roadmap. It's very typical that in a startup that there's no formal roadmap, there's no formal communication of what the product team is doing, because everybody kind of knows. They are all kind of involved in like, what's the next thing we're going to try? But once you've gotten to product market fit and you're evolving this product and you're growing a team, you need to let them know what's coming. You need to let your sales team know what is coming. You need to help your marketing team know what they need to be ready to present. Because if you don't, sales will come up with their own version of what's coming. And that can be very, very dangerous. And something else that's culture. And it's not something that's obvious to people, but the culture of a startup is given by the founders. And the founders, when they start the company, they have a vision of what are the values that they want to have as part of that company. And that distributes organically very easily when the company is small. When the company grows, there has to be an effort to make sure that that culture, those values, really get distributed to all the new employees. And that's done by doing it the way in which the company recruits, how performance is evaluated and rewarded, and how each employee treats the other employees. So the second transition is moving from relationship to brand. Again, you heard Donna talk about the players. In the early stage, especially if you are in a B2B company, there's going to be a couple of people who are the ones who need to be in front of every potential new customer, because they are the only ones who can explain truly the value that the company is bringing. You will have the engineer who knows everything there's to know about the product, and he may need to be pulled into. So when you are scaling, this sales that has been based on relationships from the player, from the CEO, really need to transition to a brand. You want a brand that's recognized in the market, that communicates to the market what that the company is bringing. And so for that, this is the time it's really important to start maturing your marketing and sales organization. It's important that you start bringing people who understand demand generation. If you're in B2C, bringing people who understand social media marketing, so that now the brand of the company is understood in the market. And it is a really important period for bringing sales, especially in B2B, starting to define what's going to be the sales strategy and enabling sales. Sales enablement and product marketing become absolutely critical because, again, you're not going to have all of those players in every single sale. So every salesperson needs to have the tools and the understanding to be able to explain the value, to position the product correctly. And again, product is quite involved in helping with the sales enablement and with product marketing. But now we really get to the core of where the product people need to be watching out for transitions. And this is moving from early product to scalable product. And this is where we really need to watch out for biggest challenges. Now, notice that I'm not talking about moving from MVP to scalable product, because when a company gets to the scale-up high growth stage, they're way past MVP. They already have a product that has proven that has value in the market, and it has referenceable customers. And now it's really about scaling it to a much, much larger number of customers. So again, to understand why there are going to be challenges in this stage, let's go back and revisit how product is developed and evolved in the early stage. Again, in the early stage, the product team and engineering, they need to move fast and iterate. And engineering is not worried about building anything scalable. In fact, engineering is almost encouraged to do shortcuts and hooks so that they can get something to market as fast as possible so that it can be validated and it can be iterated on. The focus is on producing features, capabilities that are visible to those customers. You want to show value so that those customers actually start saying, yes, I'm willing to pay for this. So there's no time and no attention to building tools in the back that would enable an implementation team or a technical support team to support those clients. And then you are really trying to secure those early adopters, those key customers who will help you evolve the product and who will be those references. And because it's so important to ensure that you secure them, you will be willing to accommodate some unique things that they may want to have, as long as they really are helping you build the product for the market. So if your product were a building, by the end of that early stage, your product might look something like this. It would have a bunch of pretty customer-specific functionality that you built to accommodate those key initial customers. And even if you had built it in a way that could be used by others, you kind of know that that was stuff that was sort of unique for those very important customers. You will have pieces of this building that are very built very poorly. These are the hacks and shortcuts that engineering was doing in order to get something out to market very fast. Now, the foundation will probably be very weak and not ready to take on a lot of new volume, a lot of new customers. Again, you were focusing on building the stuff that could be seen. You were not focusing your engineering team on scalability. Now, you will also have, and this is especially true in B2B, this is what we typically call technical debt. But there's another piece of technical debt that you may have. And again, in B2B, there will be a piece of your product that is never finished, that seems to always need engineering work ongoing. And this is the part of the product that engineering needs to touch every time you secure a new client, because they have not built the tools or the APIs that would enable a professional services organization to take over and implement and configure the product for every new client. I also call that part of technical debt. So why is it that these problems existed in the early stage, but why is it that they become a really big concern when you're scaling up? So let's first look at what is the cost of this customer-specific functionality. Again, you securing those early important customers is absolutely critical. And it's okay for you as a product manager in that early stage to accommodate some of those unique things, as long as you can get those customers on board. But the problem is, now those customers are accustomed that they tell you what they want and you will go and build it. And as you start scaling, that is a problem, because those customers can start taking over your roadmap. And you really need to be evolving your product to serve the market. So you're going to have to start learning to say no to those customers. And it's not easy, because again, they've been accustomed to getting what they want. So here are a couple of strategies and tips on how to say no. The first thing is to proactively communicate to those customers what you're doing and why. If those customers believe that your roadmap is sort of a blank sheet of paper for them to start filling in, they will be getting all the list of things that they want to do. But if you proactively go to them and say, these are the things we're working towards, and this is why, at a minimum, they realize that, hey, you are working on stuff. You're not just waiting for them to tell you what to do. The other thing you can do, and this was very successful, I worked for Intab, and it was a company that was focusing on the largest legal companies in the US, UK, Australia, and Canada. And you can imagine that every single one of those large law firms felt that they were the most important customer that we could ever have. And they all had their own list of things that they wanted us to do. So we started bringing them together in customer council. We would group together law firms that consider themselves peers. We would ask them to share with us what their main challenges were, and we would share with them the direction we were going. And it was very interesting to see one of those customers that had been pounding their fist saying, you absolutely need to build this, realize that their peers didn't care at all about that part of functionality. So that was really helpful for them all to realize that we're actually building a product for, not for each of them individually. But when everything else fails, you need to be prepared to say no. And what that means is you need to go to your executives and your CEO and tell them why it is that you don't want to accommodate this request from these big customers. What are the trade-offs that the company would have to accommodate them? What would be all those things that would not get done? And the reason you need to align your executives and your CEO with that is because that customer is going to escalate to the CEO. They will have a direct line to the CEO. So you want the CEO to be aligned and prepared to say no. I had in one of my companies, actually, an even more extreme case. We had a big logo customer, and sales was excited that we had this big logo because now they could go and sell to these other big whales. But when I came in, it was clear that we were spending a lot of engineering and product resources addressing things that were absolutely unique to that customer. So I finally spent time with engineering and product. We laid out in detail how much time we were spending on building stuff that was not reusable for anybody else. And I was able to go to the executive team and I presented that 20% of all of our engineering and product were going to build stuff that was not reusable. And that if we were to land another whale like that, we were just going to become a custom development shop. And with that, we had to make the right decision to part ways with that customer. And it was the right thing to do. It was painful, but it was the right thing to do. So the next big challenge is technical debt. And why is it that we have technical debt and no tools? Well, every startup at the end of that early stage should have some technical debt. Because if you had started building everything to be fully scalable and you had started building everything so that the tools were there for professional services and support, you would have run out of money way before getting your first product out. And you would have fallen in one of the mistakes that Donna was describing of building too much. So it's natural, it's okay to have technical debt when you start the scale-up stage. But if you don't start now paying attention to it, it really can hurt you. In its most benevolent way, technical debt will start slowing you down. Engineering will have a hard time building functionality on top of pieces of the code that are fragile, that are poorly built. And so everything will become slower to build. But in a more pernicious way, technical debt becomes visible to your customers. And that can actually take you down. There was a company way before Facebook, even before MySpace, called Friendsters. And they built a social network and they were being very successful. And all of a sudden, they got all this success. Everybody wanted to sign up for their service. Everybody wanted to be on their service. And their product could not scale. And it completely started failing. And consumers were not forgiving. They would not come back to see if maybe tomorrow it's in better shape. Completely lost it. So it is very important for you to start addressing technical debt. So how do you go about it? The first thing you need to do is realize, I call it facing reality. It's revisiting your engineering allocation. In the early stage, when you're first starting your first product, you probably can spend 90% of your engineering bandwidth on building new functionality, because only a small piece will go to fixing things that are breaking or helping with those early implementations or maintaining what you've functionality that you've put out, because you're just starting with things. But as your product grows in complexity, as the number of clients grow, you need to start realizing that a lot of your engineering bandwidth now has to go to other things. Maintaining the stuff that was built already, because guess what? There's no single feature that's fully built in version 1. So if you put some new functionality, you better be sure that you're going to have to maintain and improve it. You need to start addressing that technical debt. You need to start building those implementation tools that will allow engineering to not have to be involved in every implementation. And you need to have more bandwidth for things that break, because there's going to be more clients and more things could break. And if you don't proactively plan for that, the reality is going to force you in that direction in an ugly way. When I joined one of the companies that I worked for, Topia, and they had a very complex platform for helping large companies relocate employees. When I joined, I knew that the previous VP of product had been fired. And when I started talking to the executives, what they said was like product and engineering kept promising things and they never delivered. So I started looking at what was going on. Well, what was going on is that product and engineering were thinking that their capacity was still in the left side, like that 90% of their time they were just going to be building all this new stuff and they were promising all this new stuff. But the reality is that by then the company already had some big customers and engineering kept being pulled into things that were breaking, into helping new implementations because they had to go and set up things in the database and in maintaining stuff that they had delivered and that customers were saying, yes, but I want it to work different. And they had not realized it. So they kept promising stuff they couldn't have time to deliver. So I actually had to go back and reset the expectations. And so how do you go about doing that? The first thing you need to do is you need to partner with engineering to figure out what are the pieces that are going to break. And then you have to prioritize paying for technical debt, re-architecting those pieces that are most likely to break, and you put them as part of the roadmap because it's the same engineering team. And then you communicate proactively to sales and to the executives why. Why is it so important that you slow down on new functionality and instead take some time to improve, fix, rebuild pieces that the product needs to scale? So this is really important. This is something that every person who's going through this stage and is in product needs to be thinking about. Now, the next one is moving from ownership to partnership. And in the early stage, companies really want to control everything. They want to control the interaction with the consumers. But if you scale, there's an opportunity for you to be smarter as to where you use your resources. Partnerships can come in different flavors. You can have partners that help with market access, that they resell your product or refer your product. You can have partners who do the services. So if your product needs implementation, it's great to have partners who do the professional services, but you need to have provided the tools and the APIs for that. And then there's the technology. And here's where you, as the product leader or product manager, need to start thinking, where do I put my precious engineering resources to improve the areas that are differentiating? And where could I just build, partner, or buy for areas that are important but are not key? And a very good example we've used is embedding things like a BI tool. You don't want your engineering team to all of a sudden be pulled into building a BI tool when your core product is a recruiting platform. But if your customers really want to slice and dice the data in every way possible, you can embed a BI tool. That's just one of the examples. And then the final transition that you need to think when you're trying to think about how to grow and scale is moving from being opportunistic to being strategic. And this actually has two components that seem a little bit contradictory: focus and expansion. In the early stage, companies are trying different things to see what sticks. And they may be pivoting and they may try this one thing and then another one. But once you get to product market fit, once you find a market that you really want to win, you need to focus on that product and that market. And you focus your execution on that and you stop on things that were distractions. But while you're doing that, you need to start thinking about expansion. And that is a thought process to start early on, because very few companies that start with one product, especially if they have VC funding, will get to the size that they and their VCs expect with that just one product. So you need to start thinking, how is it that you're going to expand? And how is it that you are going to get to the future that you want? And there's strategies can vary. You can say, okay, I'm going to start now filling in a whole family of products. So I start with one. Now I have those customers. I can start solving other problems for them. At Intab, we did that. We have started with two little products niche products for law firms, and then we built an entire suite of products to serve all of their risk needs. And then we expanded to adjacent industries because legal wasn't large enough. But there are other strategies. You can look at being a platform. You can look at internationalization, being up or down market. But you need to start thinking about it as you are going through this high growth scale up stage. So those were the key things. So Donna, you want to take us home?
Sure. So let's see, Laura, that was awesome. Thank you for those hard-learned lessons, I'm sure, from the real world. So just to recap really quick here, what we're saying is you need to be building the market while you're building the product, or easier to remember maybe, it takes two to tango. And that your early testing customers are going to determine who you're going to be, who your product line is going to be, make sure that they're the right customers, that you're strategic about picking them, and that they're going to be referenceable. And Laura, you want to cover your points?
Sure. I think that a key thing for you to remember is you do need to make a transition, and you should not be afraid. You need to embrace this change when you're starting the scale-up stage. And then just remember, you do need to be able to rein in those early customers that you may love very much, but you need to not allow them to take over, and address technical debt. And then be focused, but also start planning for the future.
All right, so thanks everybody. You have the best jobs in the world. I hope that what we're providing is helpful to you, and we'll look forward to connecting if you want on LinkedIn.
Yes, thank you so much, Laura and Donna, and apologies to the audience for not having time at the end for a Q&A. I still hope you found this engaging. If you're interested in learning more about product management, you can visit our website online.stanford.edu to find more information about our offerings in product management and other topics. So thanks again to everyone.